Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in today's video, I am going to be ranking all 4 of the Precon commander decks from Final Fantasy. And in this ranking video, I'm going to be discussing a couple topics and how I rank them. First of all, how is the power, how is the flavor, and overall, how fun can it be right out of the box? But before I dive any further, I do want to give a couple mentions. I do have a TCG player affiliate link down below in the description if you are looking to get any of these commander decks. Also, I have a Patreon link down below in the description too if you want to support the channel any further. Alright, so now with that mentioned, let's get right into it in the ranking. So quickly before I dive into the ranking, I just wanted to give you a quick notice. Just because I ranked one over the other doesn't mean the one that I ranked lower is a bad precon. I'm just judging these based off of each other because there has to be a winner and a loser. So let's kick things off with Scions and Spellcraft. And a lot of people were hyped about this because a lot of people loved Y'shtola when it was first spoiled. However, the deck kind of leads itself to be a little bit clunky. It's going with a token theme, it's going with a non-creature spell theme, and it's also going with like a legendary theme. I feel like there's a lot of things going all over the place when considering this deck, and that's the one critique I have about this precon. And the other precon that I'll talk about next is the fact that both of them just threw in a bunch of legendaries from Final Fantasy, and their cards didn't necessarily gel with the theme of the deck. They just kind of threw them in there so that they would be built as commanders separately outside of the deck, which is okay. I don't mind that, but when considering that there's a glaring issue on some of the reprints, there were some really good reprints on some of the other decks. This one doesn't have as much good reprints in my opinion, but I would say the biggest problem I do have with this deck is the fact that there's going to be a lot of high CMC spells that you're obligated to cast with Y'shtola or even the secondary commander because you want to get the most value out of them, which leads itself to be a little bit of a slower game plan, which is not bad, but compared to the other 3 decks, they're going to be a lot quicker with their game plan considering the number of high CMC spells this one has specifically. So that's why I had it at this placement, ranking it at number 4 of the precons. But let's move on to the next one at number 3 and talk about Revival Trance. This one is pretty cool and interesting. It goes into that reanimator strategy. The 2 commanders are quite powerful, especially Celeste with undying creatures. This one focuses on putting a lot of creatures into the graveyard and reanimating them later. There's a lot of good reprints. I'm surprised that Reanimate and Rise of the Dark Realms are all in one precon, along with Ruinous Ultimatum, which is a very good board wipe. But just like the previous precon that I talked about, there are a lot of cards that are in this deck that don't necessarily synergize with the game plan. It feels like you're going into a sacrifice theme, but not at the same time. There are a lot of huge creatures that you want to be reanimating, but the first commander of the deck is only going to be reanimating creatures with power 3 or less. Of course, you do have other reanimation spells, but when you're building around the commanders, I feel like you may want to have a lot of more low CMC cards. And because this is a reanimator deck, I found it kind of weird that this was a little bit of an aristocrats theme. There are some cards that are more geared towards aristocrats like Morbid Opportunist or Pitiless Plunderer, and it randomly has like a Palace Jailer which gives you the Monarch, which I'm questioning why we necessarily needed that in the deck. Plus the thing is we don't necessarily have any sacrifice outlets in the deck completely along with sacrifice fodder, so I don't necessarily see these being very reasonable in the deck. I'd rather focus on some more cards that would put cards into the graveyard and we could reanimate them later, going full into that theme instead of having all these mini themes like random legendaries that don't necessarily synergize with the game plan, like Kefka Dancing Mad or even Edgar Master Machinist. There's also a little bit of a weird artifact theme in this. Not a whole lot of artifacts, but enough where Edgar might be more useful as a separate commander. So again, this does have a cohesive theme of Reanimator, but a lot of fluff that probably could be taken out. Though there were some negative things I had to say about this with the random theming, I will say overall there are some pretty good reprints like I mentioned previously, and a lot of cool strategies, so I can't knock it too down. But let's move on to the next one at number 2, and that's the deck Limit Break. And this one actually got me pretty excited about Voltron. There's a lot of cool reprints in this deck like Dark Steel Plate and Sword of the Animist. There are also a lot of other cool equipments that are new like Wrecking Ball, giving a creature base power and toughness 7/7 for 2 mana and equip legendary creature 3. That is Chef's Kiss. And there's also a lot of other neat reprints. And something I like about this deck compared to the other 2 decks is there's a lot more more cohesion. This is going into that aggressive theme of Voltron, equipping your creatures, giving them huge power, and swinging away. And maybe that just might be the Timmy and me loving that. I mean, there's some weird cards in here that didn't really make sense for the deck, like Skull Clamp. Usually you see that more in decks that utilize that with like 1/1s. You want to have a lot of 7 power creatures in this type of deck with the Commander Cloud and Tifa. Skull Clamp will give a creature an additional +1. However, this is better utilized in an Aristocrats deck. But besides that little nitpick, a lot of the other creatures do synergize with the deck compared to the other ones. Like I mentioned previously, I feel like they kind of threw in a lot of legendary creatures that didn't have any cohesion with the other 2 Precons, but in this deck, they work together a little bit better. A card like Sephiroth, or even Red, Proud Warrior, works with the modified theme, which works with equipment or even counters. They can be separate as commanders, but of course they work perfectly in this type of deck, buffing up our creatures. As far as design point, I don't believe Naya is the best for equipments. I think there could have been other better equipment colors. However, I understand that Naya is typically the good guy color, so it does make sense in a little way. So now you know number 2, so you probably already know what number 1 is, and that's Counter Blitz. This deck is a powerhouse. This has a lot of good reprints, and overall a very cool theme with proliferating counters and moving counters around. As far as originality goes, this is quite amazing. I love a lot of the different synergies that the Legends have in this deck specifically, and as far as cohesion goes, this is the best one out of the bunch. There was hardly a legendary creature in this deck specifically that is new, that didn't feel out of place, that they were doing their own thing. Another neat touch about this deck is the fact that there's a lot of good reprints like Farewell, a very powerful board wipe, Inexorable Tide, Walking Ballista, Rampant Rejuvenator, Luminous Broodmoth, An Offer You Can't Refuse, and much more. I feel like this Commander Titus Yuna's Guardian packs a punch in a way where you can move counters around like hexproof or indestructible counters and put them on other creatures. And of course it gives you card draw on the command zone, which you definitely need, and proliferation. I mean, I do want to give some downsides and some fair critiques because I gave fair critiques to some of the other ones. I feel like out of far as theming goes, 1/1 counter strategies are very common in Bant color combination. However, it is doing counters in a different way, not just using the 1/1 counters. It is using alternate counters like a hexproof counter, indestructible counter, trample counters, any of those kind of counters that we've normally seen. Again, right out of the box, I do believe this one is the best one out of the bunch and can be very powerful. However, that is going to do for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on ranking the Precons from 4 to 1. I know this was a little bit of a quicker video. I didn't want to give a full breakdown. I just wanted to give you my opinions on each of the Precons and how they work. If you want to see my opinions on the Precons overall, I do have 4 separate videos breaking down the Precons, what's inside the box, and how to upgrade them. So again, this was more of just an opinion-based video talking about some of the cards that I liked and which Precons were the worst and the best. Also on YouTube and my Discord, I did give people to vote which ones were their favorite. A lot of people agreed that it was either Counter Blitz or Limit Break that was their favorite Precon, and the other 2 were not quite as popular as far as voting goes. Around 2,000 people voted on my YouTube post, and on my Discord about 10-20 people voted on there. So of course that's a small number, but I feel like that's enough to justify that this list is probably a fair list to judge them on. But again, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Which one is your favorite Precon out of the bunch? And also make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.